What is the true value of a person? Is it the suit they wear, the title on their door, or the balance in their bank account? Or is it something deeper, something hidden in the quiet moments when no one is watching? We live in a world that judges by the cover, that measures worth in promotions and prestige. But what if the most valuable asset in a towering skyscraper of glass and steel wasn't in the boardroom, but pushing a cleaning cart down a silent, empty hall? This is a story about that kind of value, the kind you can't see on a resume. This is the story of Alara. For her, the city at night was not a glittering promise, but a reflection in a window she was paid to wipe clean. She moved through the penthouse office of Thorn Industries like a ghost, her presence marked only by the scent of lemon disinfectant and the squeak of her rubber-soled shoes on polished marble. Each night was a silent ballet of routine, emptying wastebaskets filled with discarded million-dollar ideas, wiping away the fingerprints of powerful men from glass tables, straightening the leather chairs where fortunes were won and lost. Her world was one of flickering service elevator bulbs and the perpetual ache in her lower back. Her thoughts were not on corporate strategy, but on the mounting medical bills for her younger brother, Leo, whose illness was as rare as it was relentless. The weight of that debt was a physical presence, a shroud she wore even under her drab, gray uniform. Tonight, as she polished the immense mahogany desk of the CEO, Julian Thorn, her eyes fell upon a stack of documents left carelessly askew. They were dense, filled with charts and figures, a chaotic mix of English, German, and Mandarin. She felt a familiar, quiet pull. To her, languages and numbers weren't work. They were music. Since she was a child, her mind had been a strange, perfect sponge, absorbing patterns effortlessly. Without thinking, she scanned the pages. Her brain, a silent, powerful calculator, translated, converted currencies, and cross-referenced data streams in seconds. Then she saw it. A single catastrophic error. A misplaced decimal point in a currency conversion from yuan to euros, buried deep within a complex derivative schedule. It was a tiny flaw, a pinprick in a mountain of data, but it was a fatal one. An error that would unravel the entire deal, costing the company hundreds of millions. She blinked, her focus returning to the gleaming surface of the desk. It was none of her business. She was the cleaner, the invisible girl. She picked up her cloth, ready to move on, but a thought, small and insistent, stopped her. A thought of Leo, a thought of the crushing weight. With a trembling hand, she picked up a stray graphite pencil from the floor and made a tiny, almost imperceptible tick mark next to the offending number. A mark so faint it was little more than a shadow. Then, her heart pounding, she finished her work and disappeared back into the city's shadows, leaving behind a silent warning that no one was ever meant to find. Julian Thorn stood before the panoramic window of his office. The city lights a cold, indifferent constellation below. They called him the Ice King, a monarch of the markets, a man who had inherited an empire and multiplied its value through sheer, ruthless brilliance. But the crown was heavy. Tonight it felt like it was forged from lead. The Axiom merger, the deal that was meant to be his magnum opus, the final step out of his legendary father's shadow, was collapsing. For 48 hours, he and his elite team of analysts, men with degrees from Harvard and Wharton, had been tearing through the data, searching for the flaw that their German counterparts insisted was there. They found nothing. His team saw strength. The Germans saw a catastrophic miscalculation. The deal was set to implode at dawn, and with it, Julian's reputation. He was isolated by his power, a king in an empty castle of his own making, the silence of the penthouse floor amplifying his frustration. He ran a hand through his dark hair, his tailored suit feeling more like a straitjacket. He was failing. He stalked back to his desk, his gaze falling upon the highlighted document. He was about to sweep it into his briefcase in disgust when something caught his eye. A smudge. A tiny, foreign mark on the pristine paper, right next to the derivative schedule. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. It wasn't a smudge. It was a pencil mark. A faint, hesitant tick, so small and insignificant that he had overlooked it a dozen times. It was next to a single number in a sea of thousands. A number his team had verified repeatedly. On a furious impulse, he ran the calculation again, but this time, he manually checked the yuan to euro conversion rate from the specific date of the projection. His blood ran cold. The cleaner. It had to be the cleaner. No one else had been in his office. A surge of pure, cold anger washed over him. Who would have the audacity, the sheer, unbelievable nerve to touch his private documents, let alone mark them? He stabbed the button on his intercom. Security. Get me the surveillance footage from my office for the last 12 hours. And I want the full name and file of the cleaner assigned to this floor. Now, he didn't know if he was angrier at the breach of protocol or at the terrifying, impossible fact that a ghost with a cleaning cart may have just found what his entire multi-million-dollar team had missed. The next night, the air in the penthouse office was thick with unspoken tension. Alara pushed her cart through the doorway, her mind already calculating the hours she'd need to work on the weekend to cover the new prescription for Leo. She froze. A figure was standing by the window, silhouetted against the city. Julian Thorne. He turned slowly, his face unreadable, carved from marble and shadow. He held the document in his hand. "Did you do this?" he asked, his voice low and dangerously calm. He tapped the page with his finger, right on the faint pencil mark. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. She was going to be fired. The thought of losing this job, the one thing keeping her and Leo afloat, was paralyzing. She could lie, deny everything. But her mother had raised her to own her actions, no matter how small. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, she expected him to yell, to call security. Instead, he simply watched her, his gaze intense, analytical. "Explain it to me," he said. Not a request. Command. Trembling, she stepped forward, her worn work shoes silent on the expensive rug. She pointed a slender finger at the page. "The error is in the currency hedge," she began, her voice gaining a sliver of confidence as she retreated into the safety of numbers. "The projection used the spot exchange rate for the yuan, but the contract specifies the 3-month forward rate from the initial signing date. The document is in German, but this addendum," she pointed, "is in Mandarin, and it cross-references a different baseline. The decimal point is misplaced by 2 positions because of the conversion. It's not a $10 million asset. It's a $100,000 one. The entire valuation is wrong." She finished, breathless, looking up at him, braced for the explosion. Julian Thorne said nothing. He stared at the document, then back at her. The silence stretched, pulling taut like a wire. He saw not a cleaner, but a mind of breathtaking clarity. A mind that had cut through linguistic barriers and financial complexity in a single glance. His team of experts, with all their pedigrees and accolades, had failed. This woman, this ghost in a gray uniform, had succeeded. He lowered the paper, a strange light in his eyes. He had built his empire on identifying undervalued assets. And standing before him was the most undervalued asset he had ever encountered. "What is your name?" he asked. "Alara," she whispered. "Alara," he repeated, the name tasting foreign and significant. "Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., you will be at this office. You will not be wearing that uniform. You will work for me, not as a cleaner. As my personal analyst." Alara stared at him, uncomprehending. I don't understand. "I'll pay you 100 times what you make now," he stated, as if discussing the weather. "And that is just the start. Your only job is to see what everyone else misses. Do you understand me now?" She could only nod, her world tilting on its axis. The Ice King of Thorne Industries had just looked at an invisible girl and seen a queen. The transition was a violent shock to the system. One day, Alara was scrubbing floors. The next, she was being shown to a small but clean office with her name on the door. Alara Vance, analyst. She had used her mother's surname for the application, a small shield against the world. She wore a simple black dress she'd bought from a thrift store, the fabric feeling flimsy and inadequate next to the sharp, tailored suits that moved with predatory grace through the hallways. The whispers followed her like a trail of static. They knew she was the cleaner. They didn't know how or why she was here, but her presence was a disruption to the natural order of things, and the corporate ecosystem reacted with suspicion and scorn. The most potent source of that scorn was Marcus Vance, the company's chief operating officer. He was a man whose smile never reached his cold, calculating eyes. He had been his father's rival and had viewed Julian's ascension to CEO as a personal insult. When Julian introduced Alara in the morning executive briefing, Marcus had looked at her not as a person, but as a bizarre and foolish gambit. He saw her as Julian's pet project, a baffling act of charity he could use to undermine his rival. He approached her new office later that day, leaning against the doorframe with an air of predatory condescension. "So, you're the company's new prodigy," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Julian has always had a flair for the dramatic. Alara said nothing, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Let's see what you're made of, shall we?" Marcus continued, sliding a heavy data drive onto her desk. "This is the complete archive of the OmniSource subsidiary, a failed venture from about 10 years back. We lost nearly $1 billion on it. No one ever figured out the precise point of failure. It's a mess of corrupted files, conflicting reports, and bad data. A team of our best analysts spent a month on it and gave up." He smiled, a thin, cruel line. "Find the source of the rot. I want a full report on my desk in 48 hours. It was an impossible task. A public execution disguised as a work assignment." He wanted her to fail, to crash and burn so spectacularly that Julian would be forced to admit his mistake and send the little cleaner back to her mops and buckets. As Marcus walked away, a satisfied smirk on his face, Alara stared at the data drive. Felt as cold and heavy as a tombstone. 48 hours. She thought of Leo, of the stack of bills on her kitchen table. Failure was not an option. It had never been an option. She took a deep breath, plugged the drive into her new computer, and the first of 10,000 files flickered onto the screen. The world outside her small office disappeared. The whispers in the hallway, the skeptical glances, the weight of her ill-fitting dress. It all faded away, replaced by the pure, clean language of data. For 36 hours, Alara didn't sleep. She subsisted on stale coffee and a fierce, burning determination fueled by the image of her brother's trusting smile. This wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline, and she would not let it snap. The OmniSource files were everything Marcus had promised. A digital graveyard of a failed company. But where others saw chaos, Alara saw a story. Her mind sifted through the noise, her unique gift allowing her to see the connections that lay dormant beneath the surface. She read financial projections in English, technical specifications in German, and internal emails in hastily written Spanish. She didn't just read them. She absorbed them, cross-referencing a decade-old memo with a budget line item from 3 years later. The numbers told one story, a simple tale of market downturns and bad investments. But the words told another. Late on the second day, David Chun, Julian's chief counsel and only real friend, appeared at her door. He was a sharp, impeccably dressed man who carried an aura of cautious intelligence. He had been the most vocal in his skepticism about Julian's decision, warning him of the risks of the mockery they would face. He held 2 cups of coffee. "Thorne is worried you haven't left this room," he said, his tone neutral as he placed a cup on her desk. "He's also worried you'll fail." "I admit, so am I." Alara looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but intensely focused. "I won't fail," she said, her voice raspy. David studied her, taking in the chaotic spread of papers, the complex diagrams she had scrawled on a whiteboard. He saw not a cleaner playing dress-up, but a scholar on the verge of a breakthrough. A flicker of respect broke through his skepticism. "Marcus Vance set you up," David said quietly. "He's been trying to push Julian into a merger with a rival firm, Sterling Cole. He claims it will save us, but Julian thinks it's a Trojan horse. Exposing Julian's new prodigy as a fraud would weaken his position with the board enough for Marcus to make his move." He paused, his expression softening slightly. "Julian's father, he believed in finding talent in unlikely places. That's how he built this company. Julian is trying to honor that legacy. He's put a lot of faith in you, Alara." Don't make him regret it. David's words hung in the air long after he left. He had given her not just coffee, but context. A motive. A piece of the puzzle that wasn't in the data. With renewed purpose, she turned back to the screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard. And then, in the deepest archives, she found it. The breakthrough came not from a spreadsheet, but from a series of translated emails between a low-level project manager at OmniSource and a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands. The emails, written in a colloquial Portuguese dialect, were disguised as simple supply chain negotiations. But Alara, who had learned the language from a Brazilian neighbor as a child, saw the coded language. The shipping delays were transfers of funds. The defective parts were falsified quality reports. It was a slow, methodical bleed, a deliberate act of sabotage designed to cripple the company from the inside out. For 10 years, the architect of this destruction had hidden behind a wall of complexity and linguistic obscurity. Following the digital trail, Alara uncovered a series of encrypted transactions. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place when she cross-referenced the transaction dates with the expense reports of Thorn Industries executives. Only one person had been in the right places at the right times, with the authority to approve the payments that masked the fraud. A man who benefited directly from OmniSource's failure, as it allowed him to acquire its remaining assets for his own side venture at a fraction of their cost. The saboteur was Marcus Vance. He had played the long game, creating a disaster he could later use as leverage to gain more power. He never imagined that someone would come along who could read Portuguese, understand German engineering specs, and trace Cayman Islands' financial laundering all at once. Alara didn't feel triumph, only a cold, grim certainty. She spent the next 2 hours compiling her findings into a brutally simple, 5-page report. There was no speculation, no accusation. Just a chronological presentation of facts, emails, and bank transfers. A clear, undeniable line drawn from Marcus Vance to the billion-dollar collapse of OmniSource. She printed a single copy and walked the silent hallways to Julian Thorn's office. He was there, as she knew he would be, staring out at the city. He didn't turn as she entered. "Did you find it?" he asked, his voice weary. "Yes," she said, placing the report on his desk. He picked it up and began to read. She watched his expression change. The weariness evaporated, replaced by a glacial stillness. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the pages. The betrayal was a decade old, but the report made it as fresh as an open wound. He looked from the last page to a different file on his desk, the prospectus for the Sterling Coal merger that Marcus was pushing so aggressively. Julian's eyes narrowed as his mind, as sharp and analytical as Alara's, connected the past to the present. The merger wasn't a rescue plan. It was the final move in Marcus's decade-long chess game, a move that would gut Thorn Industries and deliver its carcass to their biggest rival, with Marcus installed as the new king. He looked up at Alara, his eyes dark with a controlled fury. "The board meets in 1 hour," he said. "You will be there." The boardroom at Thorn Industries was a cathedral of corporate power. A long, polished table reflected the grim faces of the board members, men and women who controlled billions and steered the course of industries. At the head of the table, Marcus Vance was in his element. He was delivering a masterful presentation on the necessity of the Sterling Coal merger, his voice smooth and confident, his charts and graphs telling a convincing story of impending doom that only he could avert. He was a seasoned predator, and the board was eating out of his hand. And so, Marcus concluded with a dramatic flourish. "While the move may seem drastic, it is the only responsible path forward. Julian's recent, erratic decisions have put us in a vulnerable position. We need stability. We need this merger." Just as the board members began to nod in agreement, the doors opened. Julian Thorn strode in, his presence immediately shifting the room's atmosphere from calm deliberation to icy tension. Behind him, small and resolute, was Alara. Marcus's face tightened into a mask of contempt. "Julian, this is a closed meeting. I hardly think this is the time to be showing off your new." Assistant Julian ignored him, taking his seat at the table. "Before we vote," he said, his voice cutting through the air, "there is another matter to discuss." A piece of company history that has direct bearing on our future. Ms. Vance has prepared a brief report, he nodded to Alara. Every eye in the room turned to her. She felt 100 invisible needles pricking her skin, the weight of their collective disbelief of physical force. She walked to the front of the room, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked at Julian, who gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. Her voice was quiet but clear, devoid of emotion. She didn't present a theory. She laid out a trail of evidence. She spoke of the OmniSource subsidiary, of the falsified reports, the coded emails in Portuguese, the hidden bank transfers. With each sentence, she placed another brick in an inescapable wall of facts. She never once mentioned Marcus's name. She didn't have to. The data spoke for her. When she finished, a profound silence filled the room. Marcus Vance was pale, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. The trap he had set for her had snapped shut on him instead. He did the only thing a cornered animal can do. He attacked. "This is an outrage," he exploded, rising to his feet. "Are we really going to listen to this fantasy? From who? The cleaner. This is the person you're betting the company's future on, Julian? A janitor you found scrubbing your floors. She's a fraud. A nobody you've coached to parrot this ludicrous story to settle some personal score with me." He pointed a shaking finger at Alara. "Look at her. Do you really believe she could uncover something that our best forensic accountants missed for a decade? It's absurd. She's your puppet. And this is nothing but a pathetic, desperate character assassination." His voice echoed in the silent room, the accusations ugly and sharp. Alara stood her ground, her expression calm, her integrity a shield he could not penetrate. The board members shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the furious COO, the stone-faced CEO, and the quiet, unknown woman who stood at the center of the storm. Julian let Marcus's tirade hang in the air, letting the ugliness of it sink in. Then he spoke, his voice dangerously soft. "You're right about one thing, Marcus. It is hard to believe." He slid a single piece of paper down the polished table. It stopped directly in front of the lead board member. "That is why, after Ms. Vance brought her report to me an hour ago, I made a phone call. That is a confirmation from a bank in the Cayman Islands. It details a holding account that has received regular payments for the last 10 years from shell corporations linked to Sterling Coal. The account belongs to you, Marcus." The color drained completely from Marcus Vance's face. It was over. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of security officers entering quietly from a side door. Marcus didn't even look at them. He just sank into his chair, a man utterly and completely defeated. The board, without a word, unanimously voted to terminate his employment and pursue legal action. Later that evening, the chaos had subsided, leaving behind a strange calm. Julian found Alara standing by the same panoramic window where he had first confronted her. The city glittered below them, the same view, but everything had changed. She was no longer a ghost in his world. She was the architect of its salvation. "They're all looking at me differently now," she said quietly, not turning around. "They see me." "I always saw you," Julian replied, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He came to stand beside her, the space between them charged with an unspoken energy. "Thank you, Alara. I just did the job you gave me," she said, finally turning to face him. Her eyes were clear, honest. There was no artifice in her, no hidden agenda. It was this profound integrity, as much as her genius, that disarmed him. "No," he said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "You did more than that. 4 years, I've been running this company according to my father's playbook. All logic, no instinct. He built this place by finding people like you, people with true, raw talent, regardless of their background. I'd forgotten that lesson. You reminded me." He looked away, out at the endless city. "You didn't just save the company. You might have saved me, too, in that moment." The Ice King persona melted away, revealing the lonely man beneath, a man burdened by a legacy he felt he could never live up to. An unexpected warmth bloomed in Alara's chest. She saw him, too. Not the powerful CEO, but the man. "Your father would be proud of you, Julian," she said softly. He looked back at her, and the connection between them was palpable, a silent understanding that transcended words. "There's one more thing," he said, his tone shifting to something more personal. "Your brother, Leo. I've spoken with my personal physicians. We're flying in a specialist from Switzerland. We're going to get him the best care in the world. Thorn Industries will cover every cost. Consider it a signing bonus." No strings attached, tears welled in Alara's eyes, the first she had allowed herself to shed. It wasn't just about the money. It was the gesture, the recognition of her deepest worry, her greatest love. It was an act of profound kindness. She could only whisper one word. "Why?" Julian met her gaze, his own eyes filled with a sincerity that stole her breath. "Because value," he said, "should be rewarded." 6 months flew by, transforming the landscape of Thorn Industries and the lives of those within it. Alara was no longer an anomaly. She was a legend. Julian had created a new division for her, strategic analysis, a department of one that reported directly to him. Her official role was to find the hidden patterns, the unseen risks and opportunities that everyone else missed. Her real role was to be the company's conscience and its secret weapon. She moved through the corporate world with a quiet confidence, her simple, elegant clothes a statement of her refusal to change her core self. The whispers had turned from scorn to awe. She had paid off every last cent of her family's debt, and with the world's best doctors overseeing his case, Leo was not just stable. He was improving, a small miracle happening day by day. The professional partnership between Alara and Julian had deepened into something more. Their late-night work sessions became less about spreadsheets and more about shared dreams. They would stand by the penthouse window, not as boss and employee, but as equals who were slowly, cautiously falling in love. He learned about her childhood, her love for old books, and the fierce, protective loyalty she held for her brother. She learned about his lonely upbringing, the immense pressure of his father's genius, and his secret passion for restoring vintage cars. The Ice King was gone, replaced by a man who laughed, who listened, who valued her opinion on everything from a multi-billion-dollar acquisition to which tie he should wear. He was a better leader, a better man because of her. She, in turn, had found a place where her strange, brilliant mind was not a curiosity to be hidden, but a gift to be celebrated. She had found security, purpose, and a home in the last place she ever expected. One evening, they attended a major charity gala. Alara, in a stunning but simple deep blue gown, looked perfectly at ease among the city's elite. A notoriously sharp tabloid reporter cornered her. "Ms. Vance," the reporter began, her voice slick with insinuation, "everyone is talking about your incredible rise. Tell me, what's the secret? How does a cleaning lady become the most powerful woman at Thorn Industries?" Before Alara could answer, Julian stepped forward, his expression hardening, ready to shield her. But Alara gently placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. She turned to the reporter, her gaze steady and serene. "There's no secret," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the sudden quiet around them. "I just learned to see the value in things that other people overlook. And I was lucky enough to find someone who was willing to do the same for me." She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile, and looked at Julian. In that look, the entire story was told, a story of recognition, of trust, and of a love that had been the most undervalued asset of all. And so we come back to the beginning, to that simple question. What is the true value of a person? The story of Alara and Julian reminds us that worth is not a title or a salary. It is not defined by the uniform we wear or the floor we work on. True worth is the integrity in our hearts, the unique brilliance in our minds, and the courage to use our gifts even when the world tells us we are invisible. It's about the quiet potential that resides in every single one of us, waiting for just one person to see it, to give it a chance to shine. Have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever had a talent or a skill that you kept hidden, afraid that no one would understand or appreciate it? What is the hidden gift you possess that the world needs to see? Perhaps the most important work we can do is to learn to look past the surface, in others and in ourselves. To see the analyst in the cleaner, the king in the lonely man, the hero in the underdog. Share this story if you believe in the power of unseen potential. Tell us in the comments about a time you misjudged someone based on their appearance, or a time when someone saw the real you when no one else did. Your story matters. Your value is immense. Don't ever let the world convince you otherwise. Like and subscribe for more stories that remind us all to look a little deeper.